in this room, I got to put on this thing, and I feel like Britney Spears, or like one of the like a boy band person. Yeah. I'm like, all right, let's go. I'm just gonna get started in a sec. Audio is working. Oh my god, where? So, I need like a keyboard here. Is the thing, which is funny. Tristan, what you do with the keyboard? What did you do? Huh? Oh, okay, that's funny. It's all right. I'll just copy and paste with the thing. Or, nah, it's okay. It just caught me off guard. Um, no, it's that one over there. Um, we're all good. This is April 1st. Wait, yeah, April 1st. Second. No, no, the cohort. Yeah, yeah. Uh, and boop. And ooh, how do I send? Oh no, looks like I might need it. Yeah. I'll just borrow the keyboard real quick. This one? Nice. Thanks. Okay. And like you might want to pull up kind of close, just 'cause. Oh man. Is everybody here right now? There's like nobody missing. Oh, one person. Oof. Shit. Ah. There we go. Okay. I just needed to press enter. Was the thing? Oh, thanks. All right. Howdy doing? Second day of boot camp. Oh my god. What? You're like almost done. How cool is that? Wow, yeah, you made it. Yeah. So exciting. Now, today's lecture, which you're gonna see up there in. Oh no, because I'm not plugged in. Which you're gonna see in a second. Today's lecture is on the dev workflow, meaning that I'm gonna work through like a particular problem. I'll plug in a second. I'm gonna work through a particular problem, and we'll like slowly make our way through it. I'm gonna go so slow, like you. I want you to be angry at me by the end of the lecture, right? I'm gonna ask for your help at like every step of the way. I promise that's a thing that just only happens in like at this point in the boot camp. But I really want to make it clear. If like I'm still going too fast, just call me out, right? Just call me out and be like, hey Nima, like I want you to slow down a little bit, right? That's something that I want you to feel like completely comfortable doing. Vagrant up, and I'm gonna plug in a second, and Vagrant SSH. I want you to feel completely comfortable just kind of stopping me, asking me any questions along the way. But again, with today's lecture, the thing that I want you to focus on is more of like my method of working through a particular problem. Because I'm going to have like a problem statement. Right? I'm going to have a problem statement, have a description of the thing that I'm trying to do. And over time, I'm going to work my way towards actually, solving that problem. Let's see. Okay. Make this big. Make this, font a little bit bigger. Whoop. And we're gonna go vagrant, vagrant SSH. Yeah, the sh. Let me check to see that the camera's pointed at me. So, first of all, how's everyone's first day? Like, how was it? Pretty good. You want to do it again? Should we just do day one or like Groundhog Day style? Just day one, day one, day one. Until you're a web developer, just the same day. Were there particular things that you found really fun? Did you meet particularly interesting people? Yeah. So that's a good thing, I hope, right? Meeting people. I find that the social aspect of boot camp very much underrated, right? The social aspect of boot camp is my kind of like favorite part. The fact that y'all have like this amazing group of people that's supporting you all the way through the course. Right? That's powerful. A lot of people when they start programming, they don't have that, right? A lot of people start programming on their own, or they start programming in like I started programming in university, right? And the thing about like where I learned to code was like I took computer science, and the course that I was put into, they were just like, you should already know how to code. I'm like, what? They're like, yeah, like this isn't a learn to code class. This is a use code to do things class. Like, where was I supposed to learn to code? And they're like, I don't know, like on the internet. um, I had a miserable time learning a code. Whereas, you know, on your end, I'm kind of like infinitely envious. Because you get these 10 weeks, you get people kind of supporting you through both your peers and also the mentors and the instructors. So I'm just going to take this time to also say, heads up, make heavy use of the resources that you're given, right? Part of those resources are, you know, each other, right? So, you know, we're pair programming this week, like we're putting you into pairs. We're not doing that ourselves next week. Like next week, we're not assigning you pair programming partners. But still, you know, if you find that that's a helpful thing for you, partner up with people regularly. Right? Just take on that initiative yourself. Pair programming makes a huge difference, right? Because there's two things that can happen there. Either you get somebody supporting you through, like, understanding a particular concept, you know, not holding your hand through a question, but like pushing you along a little bit and answering questions for you. But the other side of it is that maybe you feel like you've reached a certain understanding with a concept, and it gives you the ability to like help somebody out and like deepen that understanding for yourself, right? Talking through problems and explaining stuff to other people is an excellent way to learn more, right? And to catch yourself on where you might have maybe misunderstood something, right? I'll run into that all the time when I'm lecturing. Is like I'll explain a concept, and then I'll suddenly just like, oh, like no, that doesn't make any sense. Like the way I just said that, I'm like, oh, turns out I didn't understand that thing in the first place. Just a good way to kind of catch your own understanding. So make time for that. In addition, and this is something that maybe Davey might have mentioned yesterday, is are y'all familiar with why we have ducks everywhere? Like all over the office? No? So we got a duck right there, right? That's a little duck. We got a duck on the way to the kitchen, right? We got a duck right there on Jenny's desk. There's a duck over there. Yeah, Jenny. And then we've got a we've got a duck. We've got a duck wall just around the corner, right? So the ducks are for a particular thing called rubber duck debugging. Debugging. Right, rubber duck debugging. This is kind of a concept that I'm going to try to show off as I work through today's problem. Rubber duck debugging means when you run into a particular issue with your code, right? Like you have a thing you're trying to do, you've written the code that you think is going to do it, and you run into some issue, and you keep staring at it. You keep staring at the code, and you're like, but it's saying, like the code is saying what I wanted it to say. Why isn't it working? That's a place where you might stop and bring somebody over, like bring over a person, sit them down, and start talking them through the problem, right? And you tell them, okay, here's the deal. So I want to blah, 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 blah. So I wrote this for loop that's going to go from this to this, and it's going to blah, blah, blah. And as you're explaining the problem and the solution that you've written to somebody else, often that process of going really slowly is helpful for you to catch yourself where you're saying something and you realize that the code you wrote isn't saying that, right? Or where you're saying something, you're explaining your solution, and you catch yourself on the fact that like your solution actually doesn't solve the problem, right? And it's through that process of actually like verbalizing, right, and turning that into words and trying to explain it to somebody, where you catch that. The thing is, you can't always like at work or here like grab a mentor or grab somebody and set them down and be like, you're my like prisoner now for like 5 minutes while I explain this thing. People have things to do. So instead, what people in the coding community tend to do is they'll get themselves like a little rubber duck or a little object, something that they talk to. Be like, hey, Larry. So we call our ducks Larry here, Larry the duck. You're like, hey, this is the problem I'm trying to solve. This is the code, right? And you'll kind of like work yourself through that, right? That's called rubber duck debugging, and it's a real thing. Rubber duck debugging is a genuine thing, and here's somebody with a little rubber duck, right? So if you thought that becoming a programmer would make you asocial, yeah, you were so wrong, right? Look at all the friends you'll have, right? So many, good duck, good duck. I have a little stuffed squid that I keep on my desk. Why are you staring at me like that, Archie? It's a real thing. So I've got a little stuffed squid. Okay, so today's thing. Let me hop into. Whoops. Let me hop into. I'm in Vagrant. I'm gonna make a new thing. Wait, was yesterday's thing? Did I call it week 1, day 2? Oh no, that's from the last time I did this. Move week 1, day 2 to week 1, day 2. Old. All right. So what we're gonna do is make a new. We're gonna make a new directory called week 1, day 2 for the stuff here. Mcdur W1D2, and I can cd into it. And the reason I do this is so I can have a bunch of files and collect them in one place. What I might even do is git init, and it'll go, yeah, it's git. And I got a git repo started up. So I can keep track of the stuff that I'm building for you, and I can send this off to you afterwards. Cool. The next thing I want to do is open this up in Sublime. So I'm just going to go to Lighthouse, week 1, day 2, opened it up, and there's nothing in here yet, but that's fine. Right. I'm going to go ahead and make a new file, call it readme.md, and generally I'll do this for every lecture, is like I'll have a file where I keep all my notes. I've got notes on here, and I'm going to write them up, but then the notes that I send you are going to be nicely formatted, right? So if at some point during my lecture you're like, oh no, like Nima has so many typos, right? Like, don't worry, I fixed all that stuff before I sent it out. Also, apologies for taking a little while to send the stuff yesterday. I won't do that again. My bad. So let me close this little dude. And we're going to say today is week 1, day 2. The dev workflow. Right. First things first. Check out rubber duck debugging. Right? It's a cool thing. Okay. So I have some goals for today. I'm going to write these down. First goal, we're going to say goals. First goal here is going to be talk about Markdown a little bit. Second goal, and this is really stuff that we're going to do over the course of like a big demo, is how to debug in general. Like, how do we debug? How do we code iteratively and incrementally? Right? That's going to be the kind of the big focus of today's lecture. Big. And then manually testing code. And finally, we're also going to focus on writing clean code. Nice clean code. Okay. So to sum up today in a quote, how do we build towards the solution in an ideal manner? Right? Nima 2017. No, 20. Oh my God, it's 2019 now, isn't it? Oh, that hit. That hit really hard. Nima 2019. Man, you know how like Game of Thrones is ending soon? Do you ever think about how different of a person you were at the beginning of Game of Thrones? D- Not until now. It's it's rough. Yeah, time. It'll you know it'll do its thing. So first of all, note um this is going to be a bunch a bunch of live coding. I do not want you to code along. Right? I'll give you all the code. Okay, so first thing, I wanted to talk about Markdown a little bit. So this is something I said I would do a little bit like yesterday. Right? So Markdown is really just a way for you to write text documents. Right? You'll notice that I named the file readme.md instead of readme.txt or something. Right? Markdown is just a method for you to write text documents that look pretty. Right? So it's good for writing notes, it's good for writing documentation. Right? And there's like a little bit of a standard on how you do it so that it ends up looking nice. So, for example, any heading, right? So, like your H1s or whatever, instead of me writing out the H1 and writing all that stuff in there, right? I do it as a single pound sign and a space. Right? And it ends up looking, nice. And if I'm using something like Sublime, it automatically even colors things properly for me so that, it ends up looking pretty. Your general paragraphs you can just write. Heading 2, 2 pound signs. Heading 3, 4, right? So, heading 2. You can do lists as dashes. You can do numbered lists. Right, you can do number lists. So I do a lot of Kanye themed lectures. So, are there any Kanye fans in the crowd? Hey, you're gonna like my lectures. Was that a hand over there? Woo! Yeah. The rest of you are gonna have a miserable time. I have so many Kanye themed lectures. So you can do headings. This is a heading, right? This is a list. Right, here's another little bit. This is another, list. All that stuff. But what's really, really nice about it, that I personally really like, is, if you want to do indented lists, wow, such indent, right? Like, you can indent stuff. If you want to write code blocks in your Markdown and have them look pretty, and this is something I kind of showed off a little bit yesterday, is say that I am writing a big chunk of text. Here is some inline code. Haha, elmal, for loop, whatever. Right? I can write a bunch of text within single quotes. Or if I want to write like a big chunk of code, I can do that with 3 backticks. 3 backticks, and I can even write the extension of the file that the code that I'm writing. So if I write JS in here, I could write console log, haha, let, name equal, we'll do Kanye, there we go. And see how it's like colored? Whereas if I was to do this out here, outside of the block, it wouldn't be, right? So that's nice. So you can write all your notes in here, and it's pretty. You can do any of the like programming languages that we're working with, so, or just coding languages in general. So say I did some HTML, I could even do that in here. I think. Oh, maybe not. No, looks like I can't. There's some languages, like I think you could do Python and do like print hello, right? Just other programming languages or whatever. Cool. So in general, this is going to be a cool tool. Use Markdown. Why wouldn't you, right? And when you use Markdown, this stuff actually ends up looking really nice on GitHub. If you were to put your notes on GitHub, or if you do your like README in Markdown, first of all, when we look at the notes on what do you call it? On Compass, it's nicely formatted, right? Like they end up looking nice like this. And the other thing is, if I go on GitHub, everybody when they put up documentation on GitHub, they use Markdown and it ends up looking beautiful. Look at that. They even have a GIF in here. Look at that heading. What? Look at those little emojis, table of contents, amazing. Right, so cool. Right, so you can do pretty funky stuff with Markdown. I'm just gonna use it to write some notes. Right, cool. That. Are there any questions about this stuff? No? Meh. Right, like play around with Markdown. Play around with it. It's a good time. Right, I'll give you a cheat sheet as well. So note to Nima, put cheat sheet in here. A little Markdown cheat sheet. We'll do that right at the top. Cool. So that's about it for Markdown. What we're gonna move on to, right, is today's actual like demo, where we're working through that whole situation that I told you, like coding iteratively, manually testing our code, and debugging. Main demo section. There you go. Main demo section. So our goals for this, again, coding iteratively and all that stuff. And the way that we're going to do this is that I'm going to have like a problem. Problem description. Problem description. My problem is going to be this. Write a node program. Right? Write a node program that takes in an unlimited number of command line arguments, goes through each, and then prints out the sum of the numbers. Right? So an unlimited number of command line arguments that are, numbers. Goes through each and then prints out the sum of the numbers. I want to skip any non-whole numbers. I do want to support negative numbers. Right? Oh man, that's a bunch of text. That's a bunch of stuff. Now, right off the bat, I'm overwhelmed. Like, I don't know where to start. Look at all these words. Some of these I might not even, well, like, what do they even mean by node program? What do they mean by takes in command line arguments? I have no idea what that means. Go through each. How do I skip like this whole thing is just a mess of stuff. Right? It's like a word problem. And now I have to start pulling this thing apart. Right? So heads up, as we move on towards like a solution, I want you to look at things like Nima used array.slice. How does that work? I should research it. Right? Look at that. I made notes for you already. Right? You should be writing stuff like that. Again, if you want to find out how array slice works, if you want, like, you can ask, or you can make a note to Google it and then explore it a little bit on your own. Okay. So this here is like our problem description. This is the thing I'm trying to build. I might not even know what this means yet, and that's really the first place to start, is I need to actually figure out what the heck it's asking me to do. So I need to figure out what it's asking me to do. And the way I like to do this is to break down the sentences, right, into like explicit smaller steps. Right? So I will take this thing here and let me just break it into sentence by sentence and identify that I understand what each sentence is asking me to do. So I can identify like an input or like a starting condition and an ending goal. So I have somewhere to work towards. I'm going to take this and just break it into sentences. So that's one sentence. So here's two sentences. This one here is a bunch of, comma splices or whatever. So write a node program. That to me feels like a thing. I have to write a node program. It takes in an unlimited number of command line arguments that are numbers. That sounds like another thing that I have to do. Go through each. print out the sum of the numbers, right? And then these things here, skip any non-holes and do support negative numbers. These things here feel like there's something that needs to be like included at some point in this process, right? But maybe for now I can say, hey, the question's asking me to skip any non-whole numbers. What if I don't? You know, lol. Like what if I just don't? Let's just start with that. Like, what if I don't skip any non-whole numbers, right? Do support negative numbers. How about I just don't care about this right now? Right? These just feel like, to me, as extra things at the moment, right? Let's just see if I can print out the sum of numbers. Let's see what I can get working, right? And then we'll make sure over the iterations of this, right, that I can make sure every single one of these features has been covered. Right, so write a node program, takes in an unlimited number of command line arguments. The first part to this, right, the first place that I can start is write a node program. Right? What this is telling me is that ideally I should be able to do something like I should be able to run my program, right? Something like node, we're going to call this sum.js, right? Assuming that this existed, you know, maybe this is like a starting point for how I might be able to run my program. I know that there's other stuff going on in here, right? But this is like a good starting point. So I can hop into my Vagrant, and I can go, node, sum.js, and I got myself a nice little error here, right? What you're going to see me do today is I'm going to have a process of development that I'm going to call error-driven development, or I'm going to purposefully do things that shouldn't work, right? And then fix things along the way, right? So for some process of this, that's what I'm going to do. So I ran node sum.js, and I got an error, right? And errors are excellent. Errors are really, really good, right? Because they'll tell you what's going, wrong and how you can move forward. Here it's telling me a particular thing, right? What is the error that I've run into? There's no sum.js. Excellent. I never made it, right? So I can start by making it. So I can go, hey, you know what? Touch sum.js. And explicitly it's telling me there I can't find that file sum.js, right? So now I've fixed that little issue, right? And I'm going to do, like, as part of this error-driven process, every time that I get an error, I'm only going to fix that one thing. Right? So right now it told me it couldn't even find that file. All right, there's the file now. I made it. So let's run that process again. And I've got a different problem. Right? This is a different issue. Right? Here the issue is that I didn't end up getting any of the stuff working or whatever, right? It just didn't work at all. Right? But at least the thing ran. So I have a place to start. Initialize with empty sum.js. Okay. So I have, and I'm going to commit frequently through this process just so you have a nice little timeline of how this stuff gets built up. So assuming now, like, I am able to run my program something like this, I can give myself a little pat on the back, right, and move forward. I have successfully essentially written a node program, right? This first part here, check. Right, I could even use little emojis. Check. Whoop. Nice. Beautiful. Right, made myself a little checklist. Now, I can move on to this part here that says, take in an unlimited number of command line arguments. Okay. So an unlimited number of command line arguments. Generally, at this point, this is where, you might Google. It's where you might ask, hey, what the heck is a command line argument? I'm going to do that. Command line argument node. And a command line argument is going to be, I'm just going to tell you this right now, right? But I want you to explore this a little bit more. A command line argument is anything that you pass on the command line when you run your program. So I could go node sum.js and then hello world, haha, whoop, right? I get add a bunch of things. Every single thing that I've written on here, on the command line when I pressed enter, right? Each one of these is a new argument, right? A new command line argument. Now, what I'm trying to say in this problem statement, and that you would get as like examples when you're given a problem like this, is that I want my program to be run like this. I want to go node sum.js 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? I want to be able to do something like this and end up, with the number 10 being printed out. Ideally. So I need some way of being able to actually get these numbers and do stuff with them. Now, I've started realizing that, this is the way that I will be running my program. And it's not just node sum.js, but it's node sum.js 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm expecting a particular number out. So in my notes, what I might as well start doing is give myself a bunch of little test cases, right? Give myself a bunch of little test cases so that I can check on these afterwards. Like, for example, I should be able to go node sum.js 1, 2, 3, 4. And this should get me 10, right? Okay, and I can keep checking my problem statement and make a couple more of these, such as node 2, 5, 3, 6 should get me 7, 10, 16. I've been playing a lot of cribbage lately, so I'm trying to get better and better at like adding numbers. And we'll do one with the negatives, because that was one of the things. So node sum.js 1, 5, -1. This should add up to 6, 5. Boop. And we'll do one with whole numbers. The decimals, my bad. Node sum.js 3, 4, and 0.5 should get me 7. Right? Because it should ignore... Yeah, it should ignore the non-whole numbers. Eventually. This is like my dream team. Right? Dream team test case. If I get all of these, then I'm good and I can move on. Alright, so these are test cases, and I'm going to come back to them. But like, I could run them now. Right? I could run them over and over again and just see, okay, well, that doesn't work. GG. Oh well. Now, what I could start off with is I could be a little cheeky, right? I could say, you know what? Node sum of 1, 2, 3, 4, right? I could just ignore the rest of the test cases. I could just console log 10, right? I'd be very sneaky, go to sum.js and go console.log 10, right? And now I run my program and I go node sum 1, 2, 3, 4. Got myself 10. Looks easy day. Who said programming was hard? Oh my god, right? Clock out. I can go home. And then my boss comes by and says, okay, well, have you tried it with the other test cases? I'm like, what? There were other tests? Oh, man. Right? Okay, fine. I'll work on the other stuff. Right? But what I want to point out is that me doing that is not a bad thing. Right? I've done like the minimal amount of work to get like one thing to work. Right? Minimal amount of work. Also, like, look, very little code. Very little code. Right? But as I start introducing more test cases, now I'm going to have to get a little funkier. Right? What I might do is do an if condition and check to see if the command line arguments are 1, 2, 3, 4, then print 10. If they're 2, 5, 3, 6, print 16. If they're 1, 5, -1, then print 5. And then the same for down here. I could do that. But what I'm going to find is that as I introduce more and more test cases, right, like my code base is going to get longer and longer and longer. Right? So I'll have to find like a better solution. Now this is all hinging on the fact that I need to figure out how I even access these things. How do I even access those? So when you are running into issues like this, right, how to figure out problems, right, or rather Nima's tips on how to solve problems, figure out problems. Doctors hate him, so I've always liked the hate. Hot tip: try it out on your own for 15 minutes. Give yourself like 15 minutes of hardcore trying out stuff. Then, ask for help from a peer for a little while, and then put yourself in the queue. I do not want you to struggle with something for 2 hours. That's not the point of this boot camp, right? You're not supposed to just like smash your head against your desk 2 hours like, oh, why can't I figure this out? The design of this boot camp is that when you're stuck for 15 minutes, you ask for help, right? And a mentor will come by and like kind of leapfrog you forward, right? Give you the tools that you need to understand that issue and go forward. I had to struggle for like days to figure out teeny things, right? You get to hop forward every 15 minutes, right? I really want to point this out because you can tunnel vision in on an issue, right? And sometimes I'll assist people who are like, man, I've been dealing with this for like an hour and a half. I'm like, why didn't you ask for help, right? Ask for help. We're here for that. Right? So try it out on your own for 15 minutes. And what this is going to mean is, look at Google, right? Look at, oh my God. Look at documentation and look at Stack Overflow. Right? So we're going to Google things. Hot tip for Googling stuff. Put yourself in like, I'll Google things the way like my grandma Googles things. Like, hey Google, how do I get command line arguments in JavaScript? Right? How do I get command line arguments in JavaScript? Please and thank you. And I can run that, and then in a minute, oh my God, look at the answer. How do I pass command line arguments to a Node.js program? Right? That's what I'm trying to do. Right? I'm not trying to be silly here. If you phrase your question to Google in the form of a question, chances are you're going to find the answer, right? Because here's a fun fact about you becoming a web developer is you're not special. You're not unique. There are so many just like you. That was my favorite part of becoming a web dev is like realizing that maybe it sounds a little dark saying like you're not special, but more like you're not alone. Right? Any problem that you run into, somebody else has run into, and they will have asked that in the form of a question online. Right? Bless you. So for like good Google foo, right? Google things in the form of a question. Now, for where you can find the answers, right? Where you can find the answers, the places where I generally like recommend are in this order for the beginning of the boot camp. Stack Overflow, right? Stack Overflow, especially if you've written it in the form of a question. Right? Stack Overflow followed by the documentation for that particular tool. And then third would be things like Medium posts, right? And other blog posts. But like I would rank it that way for the beginning of boot camp. Stack Overflow, then documentation, then Medium posts, and other blog posts. Right. Later on, I would like you to switch Stack Overflow and documentation, right? So that documentation should come first. So to write this down here, look at Google, look at documentation, Stack Overflow, right? The flow should be, so early on in boot camp, just so that you remember this is Stack Overflow is your treasure trove for excellent information. Second is the docs, right? Right. So maybe the Node.js docs, right? Or the MDN, which we're going to take a look at in a minute. And then third would be like Medium posts, general blogs, right? And then later on, 1 and 2 switch. Like I would tell you to switch like next week. Right, and really start using the docs a little bit more. Right? You're going to find that the documentation for things feels like a little terse. It feels a little gross and hard to read right now. In fact, if I was to hop right into the Node.js docs, right, like here are the docs for Node.js, and I go to it, and it's just, you can pick the version of Node that you're working with. We're going to say 9 or whatever. Or, see, we're going to do 10.15.3 API. There you go. And this is the docs. There's a whole list of things, right? And you can pop into particular things and read them. And it's just hard. It's like reading a dictionary, right? And right now, like if you hop into it right now, it can be a little frustrating, right? Over time, you're going to get really good at reading this stuff, and it's going to be like immediate. You'll find exactly what you're looking for. But for right now, it just feels like diving into a dictionary, right? Whereas if I go to Stack Overflow at the moment, right, generally there's going to be one answer that has a check mark. That's a good one. I'll want to verify that the question that had been asked, because Stack Overflow is kind of like Yahoo Answers for programmers. It's going to be a question and then many answers. I want to make sure that the question that's being asked actually has to do with what I'm asking, right? And this person's saying, okay, yeah, I want to write a program where you can go node server.js or whatever JS and then write a name afterwards. How do I get access to that name? Right? How do I get access to that name in my program? And this person down here is telling us, you can use process.argv. Right? You use process.argv. I'm going to show you a little example of how to use that. Here are the docs, so you can dive deeper into it. And here's a little bit of an explanation. So process.argv is an array that contains all of the command line arguments. The first element we're going to see is the word node, or it's going to have something to do with node. The second element is going to be the name of the file that we're running. And then all of the other elements are the additional command line elements, or arguments. Right? And I'll go, okay, all right, I trust you. But we're going to try it out ourselves, and I can go here and go, hey, you know what? Let's console log, and I'll set a little goal for myself. Console log all of the arguments. Right? This person's told me that I can use process.argv. And generally, when I console log things, I don't just console log the value. I'll also console log a word next to it for myself so that I can see it in my program. So I can say, hey, process argv is this or whatever. Right? And then I'm going to run this thing, and I'm going to, run it on my test case like 1, 2, 3, 4. And what I end up getting back is process argv. I wrote that. And then the rest of it is that process.argv thing. Right? And just like that person told me, this is an array. Right? This is an array. It's got elements. The first element here is the particular location on my program, on my computer, where I can find the program node. The second element is the name of the file that I'm running. And then every other element is every number that I put in. Right? And I can play around, like, what if I add some more things? Oh, I get all of them down here. Cool. Right? What if I don't write any? Right? Alright, it doesn't break. It just shows me node and the name of the file. Right? And I'll spend a little bit of time getting really familiar with this. Right? And really kind of mess around with it. Cool. So I'm able to get all of the command line arguments. So let me just make a commit for that. Git add, git commit, get all command line arguments, even the ones I don't want. Right? I'm even getting some of the ones that I don't really want to have, because I want to be able to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, like these numbers I want to add, but I don't want to have to add these things over here. Now, given that I have all of these things and I only want everything but the first two, right? I suddenly find myself having like a new kind of step in this thing here. right? Because if I want to take in all the command line arguments, just the numbers, that means remove the first two elements of the process.argv array. And it's just like a new thing that I didn't know I had to do, but now I have to do. How do I do that? I could slice. So y'all already know. I'm going to pretend I don't know. Right? You'd be like, oh, how do I do this? Right? And I'm generally like going to Google, how do I get rid of the first two elements of an array? JavaScript. Right? How do I get rid of the first two elements of an array? And I might find some things like, oh, this whole article here, I know I said you don't, go Stack Overflow and then docs and whatever, but generally it is worth just kind of opening up a bunch of these tabs, right? And check out a couple of these different things. Right? And I might start digging through this. Right? I might start digging through this a little bit. If I'd forgotten to put in the word JavaScript, I might sometimes find things from other languages. I don't know if I do anymore, but I used to find stuff from PHP or whatever. Oh, there we go. Remove a portion of the array and replace it, and it's in like a different language. But it might still be worth looking at how it works in a different language. And then here I'm seeing that like, oh, they're using the array splice method in PHP. Maybe there's an array splice in JavaScript or something like that. The more I read this, the more I'm going to find out that this isn't actually going to be helpful, but sometimes it is. Now, I've opened up a bunch of different pages. I could use the Stack Overflow, and in fact, like I invite you to, but I want to take this as an opportunity to look at MDN. Right? So MDN, and this is what I want you to start using more and more, right? The MDN and later on the Node documentation. But MDN is the Mozilla Developer Network, right? These are the docs for really anything that has to do with web development, right? You're going to spend an incredible amount of time on these docs, and I want you to get really familiar with them. So let me actually just throw that also in the README here. Is in general, Stack Overflow, the MDN, the best, right? The MDN is amazing. So I've looked up a couple things. I looked up how do I get rid of particular things in the array. Now, oh man, I think I searched for the wrong thing. I'm gonna use a different thing called slice, like instead of splice. If you continue Googling, like you find out like, oh, this isn't doing exactly what I want to, but maybe there's something else. Because splice is going to replace elements at an index. I want to like remove elements from array JavaScript, and I should. Where's the slice method, eh? Boop. Array slice JavaScript. Whoop. Yeah. Let's imagine that I ended up here. Right. How do I mean, I could rephrase the question of how do I get everything but the first two elements of an array JavaScript? Like, your Googling is gonna improve over time, but if I Google this, like, how do I get everything but the first two elements? Then I actually end up with the slice method, right? I could also use splice to make this work, but for my example, I want to use slice. So there's the slice method. I could go to W3 schools, but I'm going to go to JavaScript MDN. And the way that I want you to use these docs, is start off by looking at the little demo that they have set up here. And the demo is cool because it's interactive. Right? They have these examples like, here's this animals array. Here's what happens when you call animals slice 2. It used to be ant, bison, camel, duck, elephant, and now it's just camel, duck, elephant. And I go, hot dog, that's exactly what I wanted. Like, that's exactly what I wanted. And I could try it out with my own things like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? Or actually, was it node and then file.js or whatever, right? 3, 4, 5, and see what happens when I run this. And I got just 3, 4, 5. Like, beautiful, right? Beautiful. I could even just copy this code right here, and that should get it for me, right? But I want you to have a deeper understanding of what's actually going on with the code, right? Because I'm noticing that slice is being used sometimes with 1 number, sometimes with 2 numbers. You know, I want to find out a bit more about what that means. So I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to look at this thing here, where it says syntax, right? This thing looks scary the first time you look at it, right? But once you understand the format of how they've written this, it starts making a lot more sense. They're telling us that you can use the slice method on any array, and it's going to have this format. You take the array dot slice, and then within the brackets, within the round brackets, you can optionally put one thing that we're going to call begin, and then you can optionally, again, also put a second thing that we're going to call end. So in the MDN docs, they put square brackets around things that are optional. You can scroll down and see that it even tells you deeper, begin is optional, and it's going to be the index at which we're going to start extracting. Right? It's going to be the index at which we're going to start selecting the array. And the other part here, end, right? That's the index before which we're going to end pulling stuff out. Right? So slice is going to get us a chunk from an array. Right? Both of these things are optional. Right? For me, I want to get from a particular index all the way to the end, so I can just use one value. Right? Just the begin. Right? And it'll tell me here if end is omitted, if I don't put in an end value, slice is going to go all the way through to the end of the array. Right? It'll even tell me what the return value of this function is. Oh, this gives me a whole new array. Useful. Right? There's generally a lot of description and information down here for you to read some more, right? And then there's even examples for you to play around with. Right? So really dive into the documentation for this stuff. I'm doing slice. I know some of you already knew about the slice function, right? But you're going to be doing this with other functions and other things that are built into JavaScript. So I'm going to realize, okay, slice is a thing that I want to do. Let me try console.log sliced, right? Where I go process.argv slice, and then I want to slice from the second one onwards. Right? So I'll take this and I'm going to run my command again, and hopefully I get just 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? So I know I'm running one that's going to give me everything, because I said that up here. And then I want one that just gives me 1, 2, 3, 4. And I run this, and I've got process.argv gives me that whole thing, and slice just gives me 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? And now I've got another kind of chunk along the way. I'm almost done. Right? Like I'm almost done this program. Right? Do you see what I mean by like moving kind of slowly today? Right? Do you appreciate that? Is that okay? Sweet. What we're gonna do in a minute is we're gonna take a break. We're gonna come back and I'm gonna crank it up from 1 to 2. Right? Just crank it up a little bit, and we're gonna speed up a bit and solve some more problems. But at this point here, what I want to end before we take a break with is there's something sneaky going on. Does anybody notice anything sneaky with this sliced array that I'm looking at? Huh? Spoiler, yeah. They're all in strings, right? They all have quotes around them, right? So this might be an issue that I run into later. Cool. Let's take like a 10-minute break. At precisely 10:10, we'll continue. Sound good? Sweet. This to me already feels like I've got a lot of stuff happening on one line. So what I like to do is make heavy use of variables. Right? Now, who here is comfortable with the word let? Who here is not comfortable with the word let? Cool. We're going to use var. All right. We're going to talk about let later on in the program, but we're going to use var right now. Right? So I'm going to make a variable, and this is going to be my arguments. Right? Maybe I'll call it all arguments. Right? And I'm going to say this is process.argv. Right? And maybe I want just the numbers. Oh. You getting enough attention there? Just the numbers. And this might be taking all the arguments and then slice, 2. Right? I like moving things out into variables like this. And then what I can see over here is all arguments, right? And this here is maybe just the numbers. Right? Now, what I'd pointed out was that when we print this stuff out, it's in strings, right? Or that's what you'd pointed out. It's in strings, and that might come to bite us in a minute, right? We're going to see that in a sec. Now, the next part here in the issue is like, oh, I want to be able to go through each, right? Go through each. One of the things that's going to happen to you over the course of boot camp is that you're going to start associating particular phrases or particular words with certain programming concepts, right? When you see the word check if, right, or check, you're going to start associating that with an if condition, right? When you see the phrase go through, what do we associate that with? A for loop, right? And this is how we're going to be able to break down word problems into actual code, right? And this is going to happen naturally over time, but what I do recommend doing maybe is keeping like a list, maybe on a post-it note or on your computer or something, right? I'm a huge fan of writing things out personally. To create these like little mappings so you can use as a cheat sheet when you're looking at a word problem, right? Like what is my association for this phrase? So go through each is telling me that I'm going to need some kind of for loop, to go through the numbers, right? Some kind of for loop. And I'm going to go ahead and write a for loop here. I'll go for var I equals 0, right? Because I might want to start from the first index, so 0, while I is less than, and what am I going to write here? Yeah, just the numbers dot length, right? And then I plus plus. Whoops. I plus square curly brace, right? No, I plus plus. Right, I've made myself a for loop here. And, I can do all kinds of things in here. I could console log I just to see what that is. Right? And I might even just do that and just play around with that a little bit until I feel comfortable with it. Oh, it's getting me the index of each one of these numbers. 0, 1, 2, 3. Then I might mess around with it with different sizes of arrays and all that. And then the next thing that I might want to do is play around with accessing from just the numbers, right? Because just the numbers is an array. And I want to get each one of those elements. I'm going to go square bracket I. Right? Right? And just to see what happens here. Cool. I ended up getting the index with each one of the numbers. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. Right? I really encourage you to like play around with this a bit and just kind of see what happens as you start messing around with these things. Turn it to I minus 1. And just get comfortable with what's going on. But right now I'm going to stop at saying this. Now, this here, just the numbers I, that single value, that thing is useful for me. And anytime something is useful, I encourage you to put it in a variable. Okay? Anytime you feel like something is like, ooh, this is cool, put it in a variable so you can use it later. Okay? Put it in a variable also so that you can give it a name.
right? That's the biggest, most important part of variables for me. It's taking a value and it's giving a name to it so that I can talk about it. So I'm putting number in here, and let me just go console log number. Now I've got 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay, so I've got the loop. Honestly, here I feel pretty good about myself. I'm gonna go git add, add everything. So dash A is gonna be like the dot. It adds everything. If I check my status, those are the changes that I'm saving. Everything within the folder you're in. Yeah. You can always get status just to check some more. And then I'm gonna commit do a loop over just the numbers. Now I want to start ending off this thing where it asks me to print out each of the sum of the numbers, because I technically have this done, right? This here, that's a check, and I also have this thing. Oh, do any of y'all know how to bring up the emoji menu, by the way? It's pretty cool, right? Control Command Space on a Mac is gonna do that. Yeah, so Control Command Space brings up the little emoji menu, and I make heavy use of it. You go dance, right? Little dance emoji. Right. And then we want to print out the sum of the numbers, right? Printing out the sum of the numbers, this is something that maybe I'll have to think about a little bit more. It might be, okay, I have to start counting my sum somewhere. And what's the logical place to start, like the logical number to start counting from? Was that? 0, right? So start counting from 0, right? And add each number to the total count, right? There's places along this process where you're going to have to make those logical leaps for yourself, right? If you get stuck, that's totally fine, right? You can ask for help or like search online, ask for a peer, right? Don't plagiarize, right? Don't plagiarize, but over time you're going to start like thinking in this computational way, right? And it will take you like a week, 2 weeks, maybe 2.5 weeks, maybe 3. It's going to take a little while to get to the point where you're thinking in that process, right? You're thinking in that way and you're able to make those leaps yourself, right? But for right now, you're going to need help finding these patterns, right? That's okay. Start counting from 0, add each number for the total count. So I'm going to need a variable. I'm going to need a variable somewhere, and I'm going to make that maybe right here. I'm going to make my sum start at 0. And then what I'm going to do is, how about at the end of this, I just console log the sum. Right? I'm just going to console log the sum. And I've toggled this off so I don't see all that, like I don't see all those numbers. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to toggle these things off as well for right now. And then later when I'm ready to submit, I'm going to delete all those console logs. So I go ahead and I run my thing, node 1, 2, 3, 4, 0. Now, what I've done at this point, and maybe it's something I should do like more vocally, is that I form a little bit of a hypothesis about what's going to happen when I run this, right? I've guessed for myself that I'm going to get 0 when I console log the sum, right? I go, okay, is it going to be 0? Yes, it is, right? And then just to test that hypothesis a little bit more, I might go and change this number to 1. And I'm going to tell myself, is it going to console log 1? Yes, it did. Awesome. I'm getting that transparency into my program, right? The biggest place where you're going to find trouble, right? The biggest place where you're going to find issues and bugs with your code, the most kind of frustration, is the fact that as you're writing code right now, right, it's not transparent to you, right? Because you're not fluent in the language yet, right? So the more code you write without these like holes into it where you can peek in and see what's going on, the tougher it's going to be to actually solve a problem, right? And the way we get through that transparency is twofold, right? One is just time, right? Over time, you're going to learn more about the language, so you'll be able to like hypothesize better, right? And really understand the flow of the code, right? We're going to, in the breakout, do more of that, following the flow of code. But the other way that we can do that is throw in console log statements, right? I can throw in console logs everywhere, and that's going to be like a window into what's happening in my program, right? Without those console logs, I don't know if the code worked or not. I have no idea. So I'm going to start my sum at 0, and I'm going to say something like, every time that I see a new number, I'm going to take the sum. I'm going to take the sum and I'm going to increase it by that number. Right? Take the sum and then increase it by that number, and then at the end of it, I'm still console logging the sum. And now I'll make a hypothesis here. My hypothesis at this point is that if I start at 0, and every time I see a new number, like 1, and I add it to that sum, so I get 1 and I put it here, this is 1. I see 2 and I put it here, this is 3. I see 3 and I put it here, I get 6. Right? I've made a hypothesis that, like, if I was to run this thing right here, I should get 10. And I run this right now, and I got 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. Right? This is fine. This is fine. I was just wrong about what I thought my code was going to do. Right? Apparently, something about how I was adding this stuff together ended up giving me 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. And instead of immediately diving into the code, what I want to do is actually play around with a couple more things and see what happens when I try out some different inputs, right? So I can mess around with the input and see what comes out as the output until I feel comfortable diving in and start playing around with the code and seeing what's going on there. Right? Now, by playing around with this a little bit, I'm noticing that, like, what I'm getting out is every one of my numbers concatenated together. Right? Strung together. And this is weird to me. Because I use the plus. Right? Now, I know that some of you might already know what's wrong with this, right? But my intuition here is that as I'm reading this code that says take the sum and make it this number plus this number, addition is what I'm thinking in my head. Okay? I'm thinking addition is happening. But evidently that's not what's going on here. And I could find out by console logging the sum every time. Okay? I could console log the sum every time along the way. And what I'll see is that the sum just keeps getting more and more concatenated like this. Right? I'm going, like, why? Right? If the addition isn't working the way I expected it to, right? Something that I could do is check the type of each of these things. Right? I'm going to check the type of number. And I can check the type of number by going type of number. And my hypothesis here, right, might be that I'm expecting to get back a number. Right? It might be that. Like, I expect a number and I run this, and every single time I got string, which is what you said over there, right? I got string. And I can hop into, like, maybe node. Right? Have you seen hopping into node like this before? Right? Just to play around with the REPL. And I can play around with a couple things, like, oh, 1 plus 1 gives me 2. That's what I'm expecting. But 1 plus 1 like that is giving me 11. Right? I mess around in the REPL a little bit, understand what's going on, and go, okay, fine, I need to figure out a way to turn that number into an actual number. Right? Turn that number, which is a string, into an actual number. I could Google this again, right? I'd go like, okay, how do I turn a string into a number in JavaScript? How do I turn a number into a string in JavaScript? And there's all these different options over here. Right? You can go into this blog post maybe, right? You can go into W3 Schools is good documentation if you want to take a look at that. Here's Stack Overflow. right? The way that I'm going to do it, is using the number function, right? But there's many other ways. So you might hop into the node REPL, play around with a couple things, maybe put it in your code and see what happens as you try the different options, right? Parse int, math floor, math round, all this other stuff. I'm just going to try number. And I might start off in the REPL and go, hey, what happens if I go number 1000 in quotes? Cool. What happens if I go number 1000 plus 1? I get 1001. Excellent. That's exactly what I'm trying to do. So I can take this and I can write that in here. I can say, hey, you know what? Don't go sum, sum plus number. Maybe this is number string, and I want to go var number is number string like that. Right? And now I make another hypothesis. Maybe I'm going to comment out that console log. Or, you know what? I could even keep it in right now. And hopefully this should say, like, number every time. I'm going to run one of my tests here. And type of number was number every time. And the number that I got out was 10. Which is excellent. Right? Excellent. And I go, oh man, like I solved it, right? I'm ready. I can test out a couple other things. 1, 2, 3, 4. What about just 1, 2, 3? I make a hypothesis. It should be 6, and I run it. I got 6. I do 1, 2, 3, 5, 7, 2, 2, 8. I go mad, right? I don't even know how to add these numbers in my head. I'm not that smart, but my program is. Right? After I've done enough small tests, maybe I can have the faith that it'll work with bigger ones. Right? But notice that all the tests that I've done so far are positive numbers. Right? I might want to try out, maybe 1 minus 1. Pretty simple. Should give me 0. And it worked. Like, did I have to do no extra work to get this thing to work? 1 minus 1, 4 minus 4. It's still 0. What about 1, 1, 1 minus 1? Does this give me 2? It does. So evidently, I've solved that negative number thing, right, along the way, and I wasn't even intending to. It's just something that happened along the way, right? I could dive into it and I would find out that the reason that works is because that number function that I used, it'll work for both positive numbers and negative numbers. But something that I might find is that if I do whole numbers in my tests, I want this to become 1, not 1.5. Oh, whoops, I didn't write the name of the thing, sum.js. I want this to be 1, not 1.5, but at the moment I'm getting 1.5. Right? What time is it? 10:33. We might dive into that, or I might leave that as an exercise for you. Right? Actually, we will dive into it. This kind of iterative process where I've solved the thing, right? Or I've solved many of my test cases, but I'm going to iterate back and go through my solution and say, hey, where do I have to go and put in an extra check to make this particular situation work? Right? So to loop back real quick to what we have in the README, I'd said that our goals were to talk about debugging, which I've done so far with console log statements, using type of, hopping into the REPL a little bit, right? But what I've really focused on are these things here: manually testing my code, so running the code by hand on different test cases and seeing what happens, and then coding incrementally, meaning teeny little bit of code being added at a time, making an educated guess about what I expect should happen, and then evaluating my guess. Right? That's incrementally, adding a little thing at a time. Right? And by adding only a line of code at a time, every time that I run my code, I can learn about that one line of code. Right? I don't throw in chunks and then, introduce a bunch of stuff in there. I just do a little bit at a time. And that's something that you're going to have to really stress for yourself and really hold yourself back from doing, right? Don't write a ton of code. Write teeny little bit of code at a time. So at this point here, I've got all of the functionality just for positive numbers working and negative numbers that are whole, but not non-whole numbers. It's still great. It's still good. And in fact, what I'm going to do is I'm going to commit this. I'm going to commit this, and I'm going to go git commit. I'm going to add something like sum up whole numbers, whether positive or negative. Right? Great. I've got a little checkpoint. Notice that my commits are sort of related to the way that I'd split up my tasks in the first place. Right? You should end up with lots of little commits that each do one single thing. Right? And the commit messages that I use, like they're similar to the little tasks that I'd set up for myself. Right? Maybe I could do a better job, but at least I'm trying to split this up. So goes through each, I got that, and then print out the sum of the numbers, I got that as well, but note to myself, I got the negative numbers, but the non-whole numbers I still have to work on. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to talk a little bit about a thing called the debugger. Right? I'm going to talk about a thing called the debugger in Node. But I want to preface this by saying that I do not expect you to use the debugger. Okay? I'm going to show it to you, but I don't expect you to have to use it. Right? It's a cool tool that you can learn about and can explore, right? And it might help you out a bit, right? What I'm doing right now, it could be replaced with a bunch of console log statements, right? But I'm taking this as an opportunity to show you like another tool. So Node has something built into it that's going to allow me to stop my program while it's running. Like the program's not finished running yet, but it stops. And then I actually have the ability to dive into it and mess around with it a little bit. Right? I'm going to be able to do that by throwing in the word debugger. Right? So I can throw in the word debugger, and I'm going to make a note for myself here to give you info about the debugger. And by throwing in the word debugger, I'm going to run this code, and we're going to see that absolutely nothing special happens. Let me just go 1, 2, 3, 4. The code still works in the same way that it did before, even though I have the word debugger in there. But where it becomes different is if I was to run node debug. So you can run it as node debug. There's also node inspect. So this thing here, like I could also write node inspect just to show you node inspect. Oh man, I always do that, eh? Node inspect sum.js 1, 2, 3, 4. Cool. And now what I've ended up is, like, my program has started running, right? Or it's ready to start running. And it's just waiting for me to tell it to continue. And I can tell it to go line by line by typing out the word next. Just next. And you'll see that it's printing out, like, line by line what it's doing. And this is useful because at a certain point, like, I might want to use this to make sure that it's looping over the array properly, right? I'm going manually. No, next. Going next, though, is annoying, right? Like, I'm just going line by line. You can imagine your project that you're doing, like, next week is, like, 200 lines, right? Having to type out the word next 200 times to get to the last part of your file like is annoying. So there's a continue. If I write cont, it's going to continue running until it reaches the debugger. Right? It's going to continue running until it reaches that debugger statement, and it's going to stop. And I can say continue. And it will, again, it's done another loop, and it stops at that debugger. Now, this can be very useful for me if I want to do things like then test out what's actually happening in my code at this point. And I can get into it by typing out the word REPL. R-E-P-L. This puts me into essentially the node REPL that you're familiar with at this point. Right? The node REPL where I can do things like 1 plus 1, 4 plus 5, console.log, hello. You're familiar with that at this point. But what's interesting about it is it's not just a node REPL, it's a node REPL at that point in my program. So I have access to all the things that I should have access to if I was in the REPL over here. Meaning I will have access to the word sum, I will have access to the word number and number string, I will have access to process.argv, just the numbers. I have access to all of that stuff. If I had functions in here, I would have access to that stuff as well. We're going to do an example with that in a second. And the reason I'm showing you that is because now I can go sum and find out that my sum is 3. Maybe I wanted to see what my sum should be at this point in my loop, right? I could check what number is. Oh, a number is 3. I could check what number string is. A number is the string 3. And now I can start doing funky things such as, hey, you know what? I'm going to mess around with my program and take sum and increase it by like 100 just because I want to be sneaky. I've messed around with sum. And now maybe I want to go back to continuing to run my program. I can exit the REPL by going Control C. So I go Control C. Oops. Go Control C. And now I'm back in debug mode. And what I can do is do more things like continue however many times I want. And now that I've continued, it went all the way to the end and it printed out 110 instead of 10. Because I went in and I messed around with the code. Can you see how this might conceivably be useful? Right? It's a really useful tool, but I don't want you to get too stuck on it. Okay? If it feels like it's getting in the way between you and actually doing the thing, right? The debugger is not necessary. Right? I would personally prefer that if you're getting stuck on the debugger, to just get used to writing a lot of console log statements and then just make more time later on in the program, right? Maybe call me up or another one of the instructors or mentors and we can sit down and work on the debugger together, right? But getting good console log statements, that's the most important part for me. Right? Now I'm done the program. Technically, I can't continue anymore. Every time I ask it to continue, it tells me that I can use run to start the app again. Or I can, you can't write the word exit, but I do Control D. Control D is just going to quit the debugger. Right? And what I might use that debugging process for is that if I throw in, 0.5 and 3 here, and I do continue a couple times, and it stops right before the sum, right? So this first time I'm on 1, the second time I'm on 2, and the third time I should be on 0.5. I can hop into the REPL, see what my number is, and maybe do something like check to see if it's a what do you call it, a whole number or not. I might Google that. I might say, hey, how to check whole number JavaScript, right? And it turns out that there's a method or a function that I can use, which is number.isInteger. I might do that in my REPL here. I might go number.isInteger of, number. Then it gives me false. Cool. Okay, let me just move on. oh, whoops. I need to hop out of the REPL, move on. And maybe on this next one, I want to see, my current number is now 3 because that's the next one. What happens when I do number is integer of this? It gives me true. Beautiful, right? I could write an if condition for that, right? Again, I want to leave that as an exercise for you. Does that sound good? Right? Again, like I said, this stuff doesn't necessarily have to happen in the debugger. You could also just hop into a REPL, like with Node, and try that out on your own, like number dot is integer of 1, number dot is integer of 0.5 or 0.6. Just see what that does. Likewise, you can do all of that with console log statements in here. Cool. When I'm done my assignment, or when I'm done my project, what I'm going to want to do is remove any unnecessary comments. Right? I'm going to leave the comments in right now because when I send them out to you, I want you to be able to toggle these on and off and play with them. But understand that as you submit a thing, you should get rid of any comments that aren't necessary. Right? And I should end up with, maybe something that looks a bit more like this. Right? I've left in a comment because maybe I want to explain to myself why I want to do this. Right? Sometimes comments are necessary or are useful, but if they're not, you can just get rid of them. Yeah. Cool. And I'm going to throw into the README here a hot tip. Check out number dot is integer. Cool. So that kind of brings me to the end of this thing. It kind of brings us to the end of the lecture. I've gotten really good. This is me patting myself on the back. I've gotten so good at getting it like right on time. 10:47. Yeah. Meaning we have some time for questions. We have some time for an extra thing. First extra thing that I want to show you before I ask you if you have questions. Actually, are there any questions at this point? Yes. Right. Yeah. So JavaScript is going to put semicolons into your code automatically. So if you don't put semicolons, it works anyways. I come from a school of thought where I don't like semicolons. Like, I don't like semicolons at all. Because I had to learn programming through like another language called Java, where you have to use semicolons, and it just made me upset. Like, I just didn't like it. So as kind of like a protest, I don't use semicolons. The thing is, like, there's different styles of formatting your stuff. Things like, some people, when they make their for loops, they put the curly braces underneath. Right? To me, that's like, ugh, bleh. I get like a visceral kind of reaction. Or as another example, some people, when they make functions, put a space after the name. Right? I tend to do that sometimes. Right? Little stylistic things that don't actually make a big difference at all. So I follow a standard or a style called standard JS, which is somebody put together like a guide for how you should write like standard JavaScript. And it's things like, don't use semicolons. Here are the rules. 2 spaces for indentation, single quotes for strings, no semicolons, right? Space after a function name, like those things. Here at Lighthouse, what we encourage you to do in the first chunk of the bootcamp, and what I want you to stick to for the first like 2 weeks at least, is the Airbnb style guide. Don't like spend too much time reading this. I think there's a reading either yesterday or like was it yesterday? No, maybe it's today or like later this week, where you go look at the Airbnb style guide and they tell you things like semicolons. Yup, they're like, yeah, use semicolons. So when you do the test this Friday, for example, part of our test checks to make sure that you have semicolons. So if you don't put semicolons, you're gonna lose marks. Which, but you know, like me, I leave the semicolons out. Does that kind of answer that? Yeah. Yeah. So inside of the rules of how JavaScript works, actually, if you look at this thing, it has a set of rules called automatic semicolon insertions. Uh, Semicolons get put into the end of every expression. So, for example, JavaScript understands when it parses the language, like it understands that var sum equals 0 is an expression and that there shouldn't be other stuff afterwards, not a semicolon. There shouldn't be other stuff afterwards. So JavaScript will automatically put the semicolon there. Right? JavaScript also puts semicolons at the end of like line breaks sometimes. Or like if you have an object, var obj equals, an object that goes A1, B2, JavaScript's going to throw a semicolon at the end of it there. Yeah, so if you sometimes use semicolons and sometimes don't, like, there's not necessarily something that's going to go wrong, right? But you just increase your chances of your code becoming confusing. Or, like, I commit to no semicolons. Like, I just commit to 0 semicolons. So, like, I don't accidentally place a semicolon somewhere where I'm not supposed to, right? On the other hand, if somebody commits to putting semicolons, right, then they commit to, like, not running into issues like, if you have a function that has a return statement, like the return statement, like you give it a semicolon, then like the return statement goes all the way out to like here or whatever, right? Technically, nothing's gonna go wrong. It just increases the chances of somebody asking that question of like, why are you doing this some places and that somewhere else, right? Again, the Airbnb style guide, they say to use semicolons because they don't like that JavaScript automatically puts them in. I don't use semicolons because it makes the code look prettier to me, right? But there's no real deeper kind of thing to it. It just looks nicer to me. Now, so semicolons is a thing. Again, there's a reading that makes you go and read sections of this, but not the whole thing. The Airbnb style guide. A mostly reasonable approach to JavaScript. Right? So that's one thing. The other thing that I wanted to... Oh, actually, were there other questions? Yes.
So for the program you just wrote there,
Mm-hmm.
to get the integer, use the function, right?
Mm-hmm.
Another way to do it is to like find the remainder or whatever.
Absolutely.
Is there advantages or disadvantages for either approach?
Not necessarily. So the question was, like, another way would be to find the remainder and just see if, like, yeah. I mean, not necessarily. If you were, like, this here is nice because it's put into a function for me. It's nicely packaged into that module. Underneath, it's possible that that's what it's doing anyways. What one might do is run, like, benchmarks and do like 1,000 or 10,000 ways like in a loop of the remainder method, and then 10,000 with the number method, and just check how long it takes to run, right? Because underneath, the implementation of one might be better than the other. At the surface level, it's just impossible for me to tell. Yeah, but that way would also work. Technically, I don't think it would make like a difference, like a reasonable kind of big difference. Something that you might want to do to refactor this is, you notice that like I just haven't used any helper functions anywhere. So if I was to hop into like trying to figure out whether a number was an integer or not, like I could make a function called like check if integer if I wanted to write that myself, or you would do the is integer. But something else that I might see is like, hey, this here, it's like a for loop. It does a thing to go through the numbers and add them, right? I might wrap this up in a function. Like I might go, let me just save this up as a sum.js refactored, where I might put this entire thing in a function. I'm gonna write it like this, like function sum numbers. And what sum numbers is gonna do is maybe it'll start off with all this code in here, all of it. I'm gonna take out the comments just so that we can see more of it and the debugger. But the comments are gonna be in that other one. So I've made a sum.js refactored and a sum.js. So having taken out the comments here, indent the for, and now maybe instead of having a console log of sum, like out here, because sum is inside of here, I'm going to maybe return the sum. And maybe for some numbers, instead of this thing referring to just the numbers which is out here, what I'm going to do is maybe pass it just the numbers like that. And maybe I'll call it numbers here. Numbers. And then when I want to get the actual sum, I could go something like just the numbers. Right? And I've refactored this so that I have like, you know, a function where all that functionality is stored. And the usefulness of this is that I might do that on you know, the numbers that I've been given through the command line. So oh, whoops, I forgot I have it on inspect. Whoop. I could do it on just those numbers. I haven't fixed the 0.5 issue yet. So I could do it on those numbers like that, but I could also run this code as many times as I want. Sum 2 on even more numbers. Right? So like that code that I wrote is now reusable. I've got 6.5 from those command line arguments, and I got 35 from that thing that I just wrote. Right? This other part that I did right now, the refactoring of it, this is stretch. Right? So if this last segment here goes over your head, that's fine. Right? That's fine. Just have it in your head that like if I see some code that I might want to reuse more than once, I can wrap it in a function. Right? And you're going to keep exploring that with the assignments today and tomorrow and the rest of the week. That is about as much as I want to say for today. 10:58, still good time. No questions? Cool. Are you hyped to work on this stuff? You hyped to tackle day 2? What? Day 2, yeah. All right, go team. Have a great rest of the day until 3 p.m. where we meet again. And we're going to do some stuff with the whiteboard. It's going to be a good time. Cool. If you have any questions, come grab me or message me, and the notes will be out really soon. Nope. Kelly. Oh. Do they have new pairs? They have new pairs. New pairs. So I guess they'll be. Have they been sent out already, or no? They're gonna be sent out. Yeah. Thanks.